Good morning, everyone. I'm Glenn Howard, president of the Jamestown Foundation. Delighted that you're here for this event that's in person at Jamestown Foundation and will be shown later on Zoom via YouTube. And we're very happy that you're here for the title that we picked was Putin's Predicament and Ukrainians' Coming Counteroffensive. Certainly Predicament fits the mold for the challenges that Putin faces right now. As he awaits, as he continues to try to recapture Bakhmut, which is almost there. He's almost accomplished it. But everyone is waiting with bated breath. This is for the long-awaited Ukrainian counteroffensive. But the unknowns are really what's happening inside of Russia and how will it react. So we're just happy that you're here today. The weather's getting warmer in Donbass. The ground is getting firmer. It's becoming more capable for armored warfare, and we've already been involved in a very high-intensity urban warfare campaign in the attempted capture of Bakhmut. So today, joining us, got some great speakers with you here today. Pavel Baev is a regular contributor to Jamestown Foundation, Eurasia Daily Monitor. He's also a non-resident fellow at the Center on the United States and Europe at Brookings, and he's a research professor at the Peace Research Institute in Oslo. Also joining us is Dr. Pavel Luzin, another regular contributor to Eurasia Daily Monitor, someone that is very prolific writer. He is a visiting scholar at the Fletcher School of Diplomacy at Tufts University. He's also involved with the Foreign Policy Research Institute at Riddle. And most recently, he wrote a piece on April 6 about mounting problems in arms manufacturing as the Kremlin and as arms manufacturing industry remain an urgent area of focus for the Kremlin, and he's going to try to talk about that development today, and it's an area he covers quite closely. Pavel Baev, who will be going first, will be talking about his article in Eurasia Daily Monitor on Monday, where he was discussing the political games that are coming surrounding the Ukraine's coming counteroffensive and what's going on inside of Putin's Russia as they await this in the infighting. So, Pavel, the floor is yours, and take us away. And we really look forward to hearing what you and our other Pavel have to say.
All right. Thank you, Glenn. I really appreciate this opportunity. This is really my favorite think tank in Washington, D.C. And I treasure every chance of partaking in an event and exchanging views. I'm really looking forward to your comments and questions. Let me start with a point that a bit argumentative, so to say. I really hate the term counteroffensive when we're talking about Ukraine. It's not at all. And a couple of months ago, it could have been a counteroffensive when Russians were still trying to push forward in several directions simultaneously, in Crimea here, Ugledar there, Avdiivka here, and Bakhmut certainly. Each push was a bit different, with different units involved, with different, so to say, combat style. But now it is practically all standstill except for Bakhmut, where a little bit of push still continues. So it is not a fluid situation you would expect from counteroffensive. It's very much a fixed Russian position, which Ukraine need to break through. It is far more difficult in many ways. Yes, certainly the weather conditions are better, but the Russians are prepared now with their trench digging and with everything they expect from that Ukrainian push. It will be very difficult. And I think in Moscow and in Kiev, they have very different perceptions about what is coming. And I think in Kiev, the idea, I know, Glenn, you are a lover of history, idea is very much about Stalingrad, so to say, Bakhmut as Stalingrad, where Germans were pushing and pushing and pushing in the year of 42 to complete exhaustion. And then counteroffensive came from two sides with big encirclement. In view from Moscow, it's much more about Kursk in 43, where the German offensive was kind of pre-planned and expected and happened, and Russians, Soviets absorbed that, took it in, and then went to counteroffensive against exhausted Germans. Certainly both analogies are not far from perfect, And with Stalingrad, the main thing was surprise. Germans didn't expect that kind of Russian.
So you're saying here the roles are reversed. Ukraine is kind of the Soviet.
They are reversed in a different way. So both have the kind of Second World War as a reference point,
Right.
but differently. And again, every analogy is problematic. For Stalingrad, the element of surprise is missing because definitely put on Bakhmut is happening, but Russians expect now the Ukrainian strike. And with Kursk, what was missing, what Germans didn't expect, was the colossal strategic reserves Soviet Union had for the counteroffensive. Tactical intelligence and operational intelligence in Germany worked fine, strategic intelligence didn't. Probably with the Russians, with the Soviets, it was the other way around in 43, but again, that's already old history. Expectations are very different. Wars is always unpredictable, and interplay of war in politics is double unpredictable. What I think is interesting here now is that we have double unpredictable, so to say, on the Ukrainian side and on the Russian side. Interplay of two double unpredictables, that's the idea which shaped up as I was writing that article. And what is unpredictable on the military side for this offensive is that both armies, Ukrainian and Russian, are very different from they were a year ago. On the Ukrainian side, we now have at least 9 NATO-trained brigades, armored brigades, which are not at all trained in this, according to Soviet field manuals, very differently. How they will perform, big open question. Yes, Ukrainians are supposed to be fast learners. NATO instructors are very complimentary about how quickly they are kind of learning the basics of modern warfare. What is definitely absent from kind of all this basic NATO training is the air component. In every kind of NATO design for a battle, air component from the air-land battle from the 80s is always present in a big way. Ukrainians are not able to deliver that. Their brigades are going to go into offensive without any air support except for some drones. It is a very drone-rich environment on both sides, more on the Ukrainian, but drones are not able to perform the functions of the close air support, certainly. And the brigades will also have to defend against Russian Air Force, which is a big worry. How the Russian Air Force will perform, it's another uncertainty. Even General Cavalli had to kind of spell that out because it is a big unknown. What is typical for the kind of Russian close air support that each time they tried it and suffered casualties, they immediately pulled back. And now it's more and more trying to kind of throw the new kind of long-range munitions from far away without coming anywhere close. It works against stationary targets, not perfectly at all. We see it from the recent strikes, how stray the munitions go. But against, in a dynamic situation, it could not work at all. The Russians really need to throw in a close air support. How the Ukrainians will be able to counter, how the Russians will be performed, and impossible to say. The unknown, another unknown on the Russian side is that we don't have any more the battalion tactical groups, which was so easy to kind of to see and to photograph and to analyze. A year ago, that's completely gone. What we now have is ground forces essentially built around the newly mobilized human resources. Although very low quality, very demotivated, kind of very much unable to go into serious offensive, as we have seen. But how will they able to defend? Defending is generally a bit easier. But then, in my reading of the situation, and again, this evidence is mostly anecdotal. There is no hard data. They are very prone to breakdowns. And well, you know, armies can break down. There are quite a few historical examples of that, including with the Soviet army. It is nothing can be taken for granted here. Whatever close air support, whatever artillery they have, it's still the humans in the trenches, how they will behave against the Ukrainian armor. Very difficult to predict, but I suspect that the breakdown is very probable. That's unpredictability on the military side, and I hope Pavel will be able to add more to this analysis. He has really emerged in the last few years as one of the key military experts on the Russian side, particularly when the old guard like Alexander Golitz and Pavel K has for various reasons keeping low profile. I'm very much looking to hear from Pavel, because one of the key questions for me in this situation on the military side is how the spring draft is going. It started in April, according to the usual degree. I don't know whether those who are supposed to be released, according to this, are really released. How the kind of training of the new recruits is going when the old who are supposed to be training them are in the trenches. How to what degree the next wave of mobilization, which is shaping up with both inevitable and impossible in the traditional Russian way, whether it is going to be one of the consequences of the Ukrainian counteroffensive. So that's on the military side. On the political side, in the Kremlin, I will not touch Kyiv at all. It's beyond my expertise. I don't know really, you cannot speculate on that. But as far as kind of the situation in the Kremlin,
let me ask you, Pavel. There's two unknowns here. One is the spring draft, and what's the other big unknown? If you were to,
I would say the air component of the Russian air forces, whether the aviation, certainly they cannot, the Air Force cannot really interact and communicate with the ground forces as they are, but to what degree they're able to perform tasks on their own, facing some new air defenses in the Ukrainian new brigades. That's another big unknown on the Russian military side. On the political side, I think two unknowns in the Kremlin are one about commander-in-chief and another about elites. And about commander-in-chief, so to say, about Putin, his latest appearances and performances are really look very odd. On some cases, he is extremely concerned about his personal safety and health, and foreign ambassadors are held far away longer than this table. He is sitting here, cheering them without traditional handshakes and saying that all the kind of epidemic instructions are still in force. Most of his meetings are virtual. His really contacts are really reduced, and he makes an impression of a person who is very much about his own safety. There is another Putin who is suddenly traveling to headquarters in the, not really near, but at least in the war area, who is meeting with commanders, shaking hands, going through the streets of Melitopol, driving his own car, stopping at the street light in the dead of the night. Who would ever think Putin's stopping at the street light in Moscow? Can't imagine that. But that's what we saw kind of Putin on the.
so it creates two different images.
Two
One,
very different images.
Putin, the leader of the Tsar and the Kremlin, and then he's driving in a street light.
In Melitopol, yeah, in Mariupol, sorry.
And what's the symbology here? You just normal citizen Putin? I mean,
yes, kind of, we're really trying to be kind of close, coming in, shaking hands with the military, taking their reports.
Man of the people.
Hands-on management.
So he's a man of the people. Then.
And the simplest explanation would be there are two different persons. One of them is not real Putin, kind of double. Which is possible, but I think it's a kind of easy and lazy explanation. What is really worrisome is that it is one and the same person, who is sometimes trying to kind of keep his information bubble as tight as possible, and sometimes trying to break out of that, going out there and facing only very staged performances. This swings of the mood, this kind of changes kind of in behavioral patterns, are really not looking normal, so to say. You can find any psychological terms for that, whether it is paranoia, whether it is something schizophrenic, whether it is just some other disorder I cannot say, but it doesn't look good for the commander-in-chief. Neither his style of leadership, mostly virtual, nor his attempts to come to the ground to see what is really happening. Because in neither way he is really getting the picture. What he really knows, how he is prepared for the Ukrainian offensive. Because I think in his mind, control is everything. He wants to be in control of the war. And if suddenly it's Kyiv, which is in control of the war, it's an entirely different situation. How he would respond to that, I cannot begin to predict. That's one unpredictability. And second is the other elites. And there were always, from the very beginning of the war, good arguments about the kind of split of the elites, about the revolt even of the elites, about their dissatisfaction with the beginning of the war, with the course of the war. All sound arguments. We don't see any evidence. Which doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. One thing I can probably tell you about the elites is that they are as distant from the Russian people as we are here. They live in their own world, entirely detached from the people in the street, so to say. Sociology is non-existent. What they're trying to get from the mood of the public is very distorted. They don't really know. But probably they feel that the public opinion is not really behind the war. There is no enthusiasm for the war at all. There is some grim resignation. There is some perception that we are in it now. We need to do something about it. There is a lot of, and probably elites know that better than Putin, a lot of attempts to escape from the country, particularly from the urban middle classes, which again something is which closer to the elites. But kind of the point about them is that they are really anxious about what is happening at the next stage of the war. Putin is obviously very reluctant to go into any elite reshuffling, not to mention purges. Yes, there are some decisions of this particular governor or this particular defense minister, but it's nowhere close to really decisive attempt to reshuffle the elites. There is no fear in the elites in this regard. They are much more fearful about post-Putin than about Putin's possible responses and reactions. And in this regard, I think it is important that the whole repressive apparatus, machinery of enforcement of order, is not at all as powerful as it sometimes seems. Still, the repressions are still very small scale, very selective, very targeted, more designed to make an impression than to really instill fear. And there is no gulag, so to say, no this massive machinery that can do it. Yes, there are all sort of figures about how big the FSB is, how big the internal forces are, Rosgvardia, and so on. But in all these figures, you need to deduct quite a lot for those who are not really a part of any repressions at all, who are not just bureaucrats, but also doing routine things in guarding this, in protecting that. So how big is the repressive apparatus in this situation is very unclear. It's another uncertainty. But the elite mood and their understanding of what is coming, that the war is unwinnable, the idea of Putin's plan is for long war, which doesn't really suit many in the elites. That conflict is there. And I don't think the analysis which predicts all the time the splits in the elites and possible who is entirely off target. We may be surprised with the developments. And my last point, one last impact factor I thought might be interesting is about how in Moscow and in Kyiv they see now Biden's decision to go for the second term. And not just the decision was expectable, but the timing. What I see in the city, it's all about budget deficit here and the possible default there. It's all about the DeSantis versus Hollywood, whatnot. It's all domestic agenda, which is normal, which is how the elections are generally conducted. In Moscow and Kyiv, they don't see that at all. They don't even see the connection between Biden's announcement and the president of South Korea visit, which probably there was a connection. What they see in Moscow and Kyiv about that is not just that Biden now cannot afford another Afghanistan. They see that the Biden needs a boost to his campaign. And the boost can be provided by the success of Ukrainian offensive. That's what Biden needs for this campaign. Again, it is probably exaggerated perceptions in Moscow and Kyiv, but it is, I think, essential in how the whole context of this war, of this coming weeks, is being interpreted. And in both Moscow and Kyiv, they see a possible change in the kind of formula which was spelled, it is still spelled many times, that the United States and their allies are going to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. That's kind of a protracted thing. Now with this announcement, they think that the formula is going to change to whatever it takes. Because the horizon is shorter, campaign is there, boost is needed now. So they expect that the US would change their position on supporting Ukraine from the kind of protracted war to much shorter thing, which might involve different kinds of aid to Ukraine. And I will stop here with this rich thought, hoping for your comments and for your criticism, and leaving the battlefield to Pavel.
Thank you. Yes, and Pavel is now turning this part of the battlefield over to you, Pavel. We have some slides here that you prepared and being run by Josh Haney here. So thank you. Are we ready to go?
Yeah.
Okay, take us away.
Thank you very much, Glenn, for the invitation. Thank you very much, Pavel, for being here. It's my pleasure. And thank you, gentlemen, for being here. And sorry for waiting me, because it was not my fault. It was the fault of air company. Pilot tried to do his best. Taxi driver tried to do his best. And thanks God, it was Ronald Reagan Airport, not Dulles.
Not Dulles.
Yeah. Towards what couple of words towards what Pavel said, it looks like, especially according to the recent Pentagon leaks, it looks like the Russian statement is much worse than one could expect, and it looks like Ukrainian statement is much better than we could expect, because besides those 9 or 12 brigades trained in Europe and in the United States, there are also 8 additional brigades, so-called Guard of Offensive, and also there are a number of territorial defense brigades. Those are also not all of them are engaged into the current combat activity. So probably we may expect that many of our hopes will realize. I am an optimist here. But what should we think about is Russia's capacity to restore its arms, to restore its military power after the offensive, whether or not it will be successful, moderately successful, or unsuccessful. And we do see the Russian military budget, national defense budget, and national security and law enforcement budget, because national security and law enforcement is a budget of FSB, Rosguardia, foreign intelligence, and also Federal Guard Service, which is probably sponsoring Yevgeny Prigozhin and his Wagner group. It is my hypothesis. I cannot prove this, but it looks like this at least. So we do see that in rubles, the budgets are skyrocketing since 2022, but towards the dollars, the situation.
And what are the Russia's ND and
national defense and national security and law enforcement.
Okay,
It's two different parts of federal budget. National defense, it is the Ministry of Defense.
okay.
National security law enforcement, it is for other силовики. Yeah. So we see that in terms of dollars, the current amount of budgets are comparable to what Russia had in 2013, 2014. So Russia is like Alice in a Wonderland. It is trying to move faster, faster, and faster just to stay in place. Here, so next slide, please. We see what was the original plan for 2022, 2023, 2024, and what is the original plan in rubles and what is the original plan in dollars. And we saw in previous slide what is the reality. We don't know yet what will be the Russian national defense and national security budgets in 2024 and even in 2025, but we may presume that currently the Kremlin is going to maintain the achieved levels of spending, but the problem is that there are two problems. Firstly, it is a devaluation of ruble, and secondly, it is a significant decreasing in revenues, especially after the oil and gas embargo imposed by the Western countries. And you may also see that the original plan for 2022, the plan of revenue and plan of spending, is significantly different that it was in reality. And the difference between spending plan and spending reality was more than 7 trillion rubles, or more than $100 billion. That is the real cost of the war for Russia. And not all of this money went directly to the Russian armed forces or to, I don't know, Rosguardia or to the Wagner group. A significant amount of this money has been spent towards defense industry, or not defense, but military industrial complex of Russia. That means that the Russian military industry faces a significant cost plus inflation and faces significant imbalances. So next slide, please. We also see the amount of arms procurements. It's domestic spending for arms, and in rubles, in dollars. In rubles, the amount of spending is huge, but in dollars, it's even less than in 2013 and in 2014. And it is not a, dollars of 2010 or 2018. It's the current prices. So dollars, the United States dollar was also devaluated during this period, but that means that the situation within the military industrial complex is not so good, like some top managers declared recently. And Russia's arms export is decreasing. In 2022, we know only one number, it's $8 billion of export. But the problem is that since 2014, all these Russian arms export numbers, it is just numbers of equivalent of dollars, because the biggest part of the Russian arms export was provided by the Russian loans, and sometimes Russia supplied its arms just for free, for instance, to Belarus. Before 2014, Russia got money from China, from India, from Vietnam, Algeria, Egypt, and so on and so on. Currently, the situation is not good. And for instance, India. Last year, India was not able to pay for the Russian arms supplies because of embargo on dollars transactions. And India is not going to pay in rubles, and Russia is not feel so good when it gets rupees from India. And one more interesting fact is that last year and this year, Russia delayed some supplies to India, arms supplies to India, especially regarding to aircraft engines for Su-30 fighter jets, and regarding S-400 air and missile defense systems. And it was official statement of the Indian Air Force official in Indian Parliament as early as March 2023. So Russia's arms export cannot support the Russian military-industrial complex with money. Next slide, please. So, and we see here the manufacturing indexes in the industries related with arms manufacturing. It's not only arms manufacturing, but these four industries, they are related. So, and we do see that 2022, was not a breakdown year. I mean, Russia declared that military industry work in three-shaft manner, that Russia military industry increased significantly the amount of arms manufacturing, but we cannot see this in numbers. Even the bottom level table represents high technology manufacturing. And we see that there is no surprises, yeah? Next slide. But in the first quarter of 2023, we see some changes. And probably this year, Russia will be able to increase somehow its arms manufacturing. Because the military industry has three main sources. First, it is extensive labor, more people, more working hours, 12-hour shafts instead of 8-hour shafts, elimination of vacancies, elimination of national holidays, and so on and so on. Not in all factories, but in some of them. The second source and the main source for increasing it is the storages of components that were originally planned for manufacturing 2024-2025. Currently, the Russian government, the Russian Ministry of Defense, the Kremlin, they just don't care about 2024-2025. They don't know what they will produce next year. And in 2025, they need to produce as much as possible this year. But in a long-term prospect, it will be hard to significantly increase average annual manufacturing. Yes, in momentum in 2023, probably it will be possible, but then probably we will see decline in arms manufacturing, and the average level will be the same, if not decline as well, because the problem is that when you try to increase significantly the quantity of arms, you face the conservation of technology level, and you face the problem of quality of manufactured arms. And the third source is decreasing arms export. Especially this source is applicable for aircraft industry, because if Russia export less helicopters and fighter jets, Russia can produce more fighter jets and combat helicopters, for instance, for domestic market, not market, but for domestic armed forces, Rosguardia, and so on. Next slide, please. At the same time, Russia faces another problem. It is a problem of wear of the industrial equipment. Currently, you see the degree of wear in the industries related with arms manufacturing. More than half of industrial equipment currently old. And where will Russia purchase new industrial equipment? I have no idea. Currently,
so they need to replace that industrial equipment.
Yes, but it's impossible. We all are concentrated on electronics. The share of Russia in a global market of electronics is insignificant, especially if you not mention space-grade electronics. So it is possible, you know, to use sport bags and to purchase some microchips, and even here in the United States, and bring these microchips through Mexico and so on, through Brazil, to Russia. These microchips will cost like gold, but they will allow Russia, I don't know, to produce some helicopters, cruise missiles, and so on. But towards the industrial equipment, how to organize smuggling import of the industrial equipment to Russia.
China maybe not.
I'm not sure. Well, next slide, please. I will show you what's the problem. It's a Russia-made mechanical equipment, and you see the main parts of this Russia-made import substituted industrial equipment.
And what is the equipment in the picture we're looking at?
It's equipment that is used in aircraft manufacturing and in armored vehicles manufacturing. It's for mechanical, you know, for fabricating of metal, some metal parts, and so on. And we see that either from Taiwan or from the United States, this
and the number MI 745-1200 is the make of it, or
it's a main detail. It's a model.
Okay, it's a model.
Yeah, it's a model.
You see something here from the U.S.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Next slide, please. Also, my native city, Perm, produces good industrial equipment with using Siemens and also Fenner. But currently, if you open the website of the manufacturer of this industrial equipment and try to order this equipment, you will be unable to do this. 1 year ago, you was able to do this. Currently, not. Probably they're not able to produce these types of industrial equipment without Siemens parts and Fanuc parts. Next slide, please. Another example. Also, Siemens, Fanuc, and Delta Electronics from Taiwan. So, next slide, please. Also, there is a significant amount of industrial equipment. Even the Orlan 10 unmanned aerial vehicles aimed for artillery reconnaissance is being produced with using Sweden industrial equipment. And this company, Special Technology Center in St. Petersburg, it is searching for workers and engineers who are able to work with this specific type of industrial equipment from Micronic. Next slide.
Because they're looking for workers.
Because there is a deficit of workforce, and this special technology center has a specific manufacturing process with using these specific types of industrial equipment. And they need people who can work with this specific.
So they have the equipment, but they don't lack the workers.
Yeah, yes. Kazan gunpowder plant. Equipment purchased in 2000s and early 2010s, purchased from Germany, Switzerland, and Austria. And Kazan gunpowder plant is one of some amount of gunpowder plants in Russia, which is responsible for manufacturing of artillery rounds, the gunpowder for artillery rounds. Next slide, please. Motovilika plant, another factory in my native city, Perm. In 2010s, they purchased Austrian-made radial forging machine for artillery tubes. Yes, and the problem with artillery tubes currently, the problem of the Russian Armed Forces is not only the exceeding lifetime of the artillery tubes. The problem is that this plant can produce only several tens of artillery tubes annually, not hundreds of them, not thousands of them, several tens annually. And it is the only plant.
Tubes, I mean, barrels.
Yeah, barrels. Sorry. Yeah, barrels. It is the only plant in Russia. And another plant in Yekaterinburg is responsible for tank barrels, and they use almost the same types of industrial equipment. Next slide, please. So some conclusions. Growing technological gap and economic backwardness of the Russian military industrial complex are inevitable. Cost plus inflation due to attempts of increasing manufacturing and avoiding embargo, together with net losses, deficit of workforce, absence of international cooperation, and so on, will make the military industry of Russia is more inefficient. Successful reverse engineering is hardly possible. Currently, the reverse engineering, it is a topic of discussion among the Russian government with participation of Mikhail Mishustin, Vladimir Putin, and all these guys. They permanently talk about reverse engineering, and how can we do this reverse engineering if we don't know how to do this? Military budget would be high, if not growing after 2023, but only in terms of rubles. I'm not sure about dollars, whether or not they will be able to increase the military budget in terms of dollars, but domestic political economy imbalances will inevitably eliminate the growth. You will spend more, but you will spend even more than I mean, you will spend more money, but your military industry will spend more on costs and so on. And the management of the military industrial complex of Russia and corporations within this military industrial complex is realizing the destructive nature of the current political course. The evidences of these disagreements appeared several times during the last 3 or 4 months, and probably, or maybe not probably, but possibly, it is also gives us some hope for domestic political changes in Russia, because the military industry knows very well that currently it's a kind of suicidal activity of the Kremlin. And I presume that if the Ukrainian offense will be successful, or at least moderately successful, these disagreements will also increase within the Russian political elite.
So is
That's all.
the implication of what you're saying that what I hear, and you can confirm it, is that you're saying that the Russian military industry is not suited for a long war against Ukraine, or it's
Exactly. Russia tries to present itself like completely ready for decades of warfare, but in reality, Russia is weak in terms of technologies, in terms of manufacturing, in terms of equipment, in terms of engineering, and in terms of workforce.
and I think, you know, the absence of the Armada tanks that, you know, we've heard about, I mean, they're not present really in much in the battlefield, although they were seen in Mariupol. You're seeing T-54 tanks thrown in. Now they say that 40% of the laser optics in these tanks are now being provided by China. So there's quality control about this. Whatever they're getting from China, maybe the quality control is not going to be like Thales in France. So, well, thank you. It really is a very enriching discussion. And so we got several people raising their hands. So I'll call the first person here, Ted Karasik.
Thank you very much. This is a very interesting presentation. Just a very quick question about war termination. We have an offensive coming up this summer. Both of you seem to have different points of view. What does war termination look like? For Putin or for who? For either side.
I think it's far easier to say that about Ukrainians, how they set their goals, about what they are really able to achieve, and the sequence, so to say, of things. Some things are decided on the battlefield. After that, you move into kind of all sort of political processes which lead the same way. You don't need to conquer everything. You need to hit hard.
Hit hard and then,
Yes,
and then start a process.
And then start the process.
Then start the termination.
Yes, presumably already not with Mr. Putin, but with some sort of kind of leadership which will succeed him, because the resonance of the offensive will be so strong that Putin will be out of the picture this way or that way. So I don't think they're really planning about conquering Crimea. I think the plan is that they are breaching the land corridor. They are kind of cutting Crimea out again. They're focusing on Donbass, and that kind of leads Russian elites to the conclusion that the war is effectively lost.
Are the Russian elites going to talk about 38th parallel solution anymore or not? That's more.
You know, 38th parallel solution essentially means that the war is frozen at the same point where it started.
So then there's no.
Returning to status quo ante February 24 last year, and I don't think it is really an option, not least because it's a paradoxical situation, but constitutionally for Russia, all the war is happening inside the Russian Federation, because all these regions are formally annexed. So, and you cannot really trade out these territories. You cannot freeze the conflict here because it is formally a defensive war, so to say. You are now fighting on your own land. Compromises are equal to high treason.
And there you go.
And there you go. So war termination on the Russian side is something nobody is prepared to issue a peep, except when you get some of your kind of Russian colleagues in a situation where they feel free, more or less, to talk without worrying about who is listening, about kind of worrying about such things keep happening on various second channels. Essentially, they are saying that until Putin holds the power, no such things are possible. When he loses power, everything becomes suddenly fluid and possible, because all the whatever composition of successors coming to the Kremlin, the first point is put the blame on Putin. Blame him for everything. Well, that's not an innovative political technology, so to say. That's what always happens in this situation. But in this case, you have it probably in the greater qualities than usual, and compromises are becoming entirely acceptable, because nobody would then care about the annexations, about the constitutional provisions, and so on. And politics will dominate all these legalities.
Yeah, Paul? Yeah, in my opinion, I completely agree with what Pavel said. Russia is in a trap, because there is no 38 parallel at all, because the desirable 38 parallel is located in the north from the current front line. Yeah, and in the west from the current front line, if we can imagine the map of Ukraine, Donbass, and south of Ukraine. Yeah.
And Kherson,
Yeah, exactly. But towards the current Russian intentions, I presume the strategic purpose of the war is still the same. And I am afraid that it is still the same. Eliminating of Ukrainian statehood and eliminating of Ukrainian culture. But since autumn of 2022, Russia is trying to force Ukraine, or to force the West, especially the Europeans, to increase the pressure over Ukraine, in aim that Ukraine should ask Moscow for ceasefire, temporary ceasefire, maybe for 1 year, maybe for 2 or 3 years.
Moscow wants Kiev to ask.
Yes, exactly. To freeze the current front line, to make a ceasefire agreement. For what purpose? As we saw, the Russian military power cannot be restored to the levels of, I don't know, February 23, 2022. Right. But the Russian leadership probably believes that after this ceasefire, there will be a so-called party of stolen victory in Ukraine. And Ukraine will go to the domestic political turbulence. And it will be impossible, to restore Ukraine in terms of economy. And at the end, in the next 2-3 years, or maybe later, depending also on the global security environment, especially in the Middle East, Pacific region, and so on, Russia will be able to capture Ukraine once again with less amount of military power, but relying on, demoralization, huge demoralization of the Ukrainian society after this ceasefire agreement. So the Russian approach is political, psychological, and so on and so on. Towards what's desirable termination of the war for us, people who are here, and for me as a Russian citizen, is a complete defeat of Russia. Because as soon Russia will face military defeat, as soon there will be a small chance for normalization of Russia. I'm not sure that there will be, democratic reforms next day after the defeat. I presume the most probable scenario is that there will be a kind of Andropov style preparations for perestroika. But it would be much better than conservation of Russia, conservation like Gaddafi's regime after the defeat in Chad in the late 1980s, or Hussein's regime in Iraq after the defeat in 1991. Gaddafi was able to be in power for next 20 plus years. Saddam Hussein was able to stay in power for next 12 years. oil on exchange of food and medical drugs and so on and so on, but Hussein was still in power. And what we will see at the end, we will see the killing of Hussein, but at the same time we saw such guys like Iranian's proxy on the ground. We saw ISIS and so on and so on. So the conservation of Russia is also possible, but it is not desirable.
Thank you.
Pavel, what is your impression of what happened with Xi's call to Zelensky, and where is Russia-China relations going with some of these new developments and China's involvement?
Yes, I think it's very much a continuation of the same question, because war termination is very much about the question about what China what sort of influence China will exert. And presently, it is a kind of peculiar situation where in the West saying we're not putting any pressure on Zelensky about changing the war aims, and China is saying the same about Putin, essentially. And leverage is definitely colossal and growing. And Xi Jinping is reluctant to use this leverage, partly because he doesn't want Putin defeated. He doesn't want Putin regime collapsing. He doesn't want Putin going. But he is worried about the consequences of defeat. And I think the reading of the situation in China is very different from reading it in Moscow, general stuff. I was, again, from my very incomplete sources, even surprised how keenly in Kiev were the expectations about this call from Xi Jinping to Zelensky. What sort of anxiety was there around this call? And what I hear in Kiev, they are not disappointed. They think that the distance between Moscow and Beijing after the call has increased. The Beijing has, without spelling any of its real aims, sort of indicated that not only that no tangible military support is coming to Putin, that Beijing will definitely object against any nuclear escalation, two very important points, but they already know. But that Beijing is kind of shifting its position on the political front as well. And we see a sign of that in the recent vote in the UN General Assembly on the resolution, which is not really about kind of Russia or Ukraine, which is about interaction between UN and the Council of Europe. But in that resolution, there were really very strong words about Russian aggression, about the consequences of that aggression.
But China, I thought, abstained from that.
No, China voted in favor. India and China voted in favor. That's the first resolution related to that war, where suddenly we have this shift. And it's typical that China and India are having very different considerations, driven by very different goals and interests. But that is a sign that kind of overall that the positions are shifting, that they're changing their bets, so to say, they're shifting their calculus. Also expecting that the Ukrainian offensive will make a difference.
But what about Belarus?
Belarus. Questions about Belarus?
How if Russia's going to be leveraging that country to their advantage, and maybe taking some of the Ukrainian troops away from the east to support the northern border?
Well, that was certainly an option which was there from the very beginning of the war. And Lukashenko is certainly becoming more and more dependent upon Putin's support, less and less able to make his own decisions. Nevertheless, I think he fears more now the domestic impact of such a step than he fears Putin. He saw suddenly the explosion of public anger after the elections in 2020, which nobody really expected. He lived through that, and he is very aware about another one, knowing that the opposition is organized, that Tsikhanovskaya is hard at work at kind of gaining support in the Baltic states, in Poland, in various Western quarters. He cannot afford his small army to move into Ukraine because the borders will be then left completely defenseless. He cannot, and again, we maintain the proposition that NATO is a defensive alliance and will never move proactively into Belarus, but he doesn't really believe this narrative. He thinks that the moment we show weakness, NATO will move in and deliver Tsikhanovskaya to Minsk. So I don't think this option is possible. What I think might be possible is that Ukraine starts pushing hard south, and Putin might decide to try to strike again towards Kharkov, towards Sumy, in that direction, where the border is now less protected, because Ukraine really needs to move every available resource. So Ukrainians need not to worry about the border with Belarus, I think, but they need to worry about the border with Russia, where it doesn't really take a long-range weapon system to hit from Ukraine to Russia, and otherwise you can just need a handgun because the border is as it was on the line after Russian withdrawal. But if Russian General Staff would contemplate a kind of a surprise move, so to say, to counter Ukrainian offensive, probably it will be there.
Go ahead.
In my opinion, there are several questions, problems, challenges towards Belarus. Firstly, the defeat of Russia needs on elimination of Russian K military infrastructure, as in occupied Crimea, as in the Western Russian regions, as a Russian military infrastructure in Belarus. I'm not sure whether or not it is possible to avoid this. So one day Ukraine may need to strike Belarusian territory. Secondly, despite the evidences that the amount of the Russian forces in Belarus is decreasing right now, there is still takes place announcement of deployment of tactical nuclear weapon in Belarus. Probably, not probably, possibly in Lida airfield. I'm not sure, I just heard this presumption from other experts. And also, we don't know what will be a carrier for this tactical nuclear weapon, whether or not it will be Su-30 fighter jets or maybe Su-25.
What about the MiG-31? I thought
Belarus does not have MiG-31.
but Russian planes are coming in.
Yeah, but Russia side said that we will train Belarusian pilots for using this weapon, and Belarus has either Su-30 or Su-25. But towards Su-25, despite the fact that they are technically ready for being carriers for gravity tactical nuclear bombs, I'm not sure that the Russian leadership trusts so much to the pilots, to leave one pilot in Su-25 alone with a nuclear bomb.
Well, some people say that Putin and nukes in Belarus is really a bluff.
Probably we'll see.
trying
We'll
to-
see in July. But the third problem is Kaliningrad anti-access area denied zone, because when Finland joined NATO on April 4th, and when Sweden inevitably will join NATO sooner or later, the Baltic Fleet and all the Kaliningrad so-called defense district lost its sense, because there is no room for maneuver, and there is no necessity to
It's more of a handicap in Russian defense.
Yeah. But there is still Suwalki Gap. How to support Kaliningrad, how to escalate the war when Russia is becoming weaker and weaker. Every single day Russia is weaker, but Russia still has an option for escalation of the war, for engagement of Baltic states, NATO members, into the war in aim for further, huge peace conference with participation of Washington, DC, Brussels, and so on, where Ukrainian problem will become minor problem. I cannot exclude this hypothetical and sometimes fantastic scenario. So a number of problems there.
Okay. Bill Peterson,
I'm just going to mention that the Ukrainian General Staff took very serious for a period of time the Russians the possibility of attacking Belarus, and they have fortified that region. And I don't think that there's any chance that the Russians today could launch an attack that would get anywhere near the depth of penetration that they got last time, simply because of the fortifications. And the fortifications allow them to, that is the Ukrainians, to use, reserve forces and local militia troops and even law enforcement people in those positions. I just don't see any possibility that the Russians could today launch an attack and actually get through those fortified positions. So,
Phil, how do you perceive a counteroffensive by Ukraine and Russia reacting? What do you see on the Russian side?
well,
Do they have enough of a strategic reserve, you think, to throw in? And you, please, Pavel.
Ukrainians have to penetrate this fortified zone in the south. But when I look at this building, the construction from satellite pictures, the Russians have trenching equipment, which is probably the best in the world. We've always wanted to buy it, okay? And they built those trenches, but I don't see fortifications. Yeah, there are
Hardened
trenches.
fortification.
Yeah, I mean, there's no pillboxes, there's no, the fortifications haven't been constructed in a way where you have firing support positions from other locations, classical military engineering. I don't see it. It's just trenches.
Anti-tanks,
And yeah, they moved in some anti-tank stuff. But if Ukrainians can find a way to get behind that with the tanks they have, and I'm not even talking about the new Western tanks.
Right.
When we talk about the T-72s that have been provided by Poland, that have been modernized, I can tell you about a tank battle that occurred maybe 2 months ago, maybe 2 or 3 months ago. 14 tanks on 14 tanks. 14 Polish provided Ukrainian modernized T-72s against Russian T-72s. And that was a tank on tank battle. Night. one Russian tank escaped. All the rest were destroyed. There were no kills against Ukrainian T-72s. So that's the situation we will see. If the Ukrainians can penetrate this fortified area, get some armor back there, I expect the Russian front to collapse. I mean, they are going to leave their equipment and run as fast, as far as they can, with the hope the Ukrainians won't pursue them any further than the Russian border, which I don't think they will. So what I'm thinking about is just possibly, maybe we won't see a counterattack like we're expecting for the Donbass. Maybe we will see an operation to take Crimea, because we've all been led to believe one thing.
All right, just like last time.
It's like last time. And so, you know, we've done that analysis. We've looked at the maps. We've talked with Hodges and Breedlove. And we've
Right,
talked,
right.
You know, and so all our expectation is X, and it may not even be Y. It may be Z.
Yeah.
And it's certainly possible, given the fact that the Russians are trying to push everything up front to make sure that that barrier isn't penetrated. And just, I don't know, we can all be very easily surprised.
Yeah, that I would tend to agree with you. Any other questions here?
I think you're right that Ukrainians need an element of surprise because so much of it is already being
Known. So much is already known
Right,
that
right.
we've already drawn our conclusions.
But you don't know the unknown, the known unknown. Sorry, we'll let you go, and then we have that young man in the back. So, no, sir, age before beauty. So.
Yeah.
Which one would that be?
Which one would-
Okay, I'm gonna choose the final. Go ahead.
Well, it would seem from, I can't pronounce his name, Nikolai Patrushev, that isn't how to say it, but you'd think these people around Putin might have noticed that his warnings have backfired. I mean, he strengthened NATO, you know, it's just a disaster. Your chart on made in the world or made in Russia, it shows you where, so they're real problems. So how would a coup work?
Yes, certainly partnership cannot be a part of the coup, and I cannot say.
Let's stay in the video here.
Yes.
Come in, sort of. Okay, it's okay to turn that way. So just.
Patrushev cannot be a part of the coup. He is entirely, all his kind of position and influence is entirely related to the fact that he's close to Putin. He has no other asset to rely upon. And also the fact that he is probably in about the same age group, and for the coup you need somebody younger with kind of more positive prospect in front of you and more to lose if everything is lost. For that matter, imagining who might be in that group, you need to think about probably some generals who have seen the unfolding disaster. You might imagine them coming into communication with some other with civilians in Moscow who might see how bad the economy is doing. But I don't think that this kind of very closely knit Putin's inner circle, which is in fact very small, in which Patrushev is a key figure, might turn against their core, so to say. Much the same way as Xi Jinping is a core of Chinese Communist Party, Putin is a core of the war problem. You need to remove that core, but probably with him several other suspects. Patrushev is definitely one of them.
I was just gonna, I'm sorry, about Patrushev, he has two sons that are quite powerful. One of them, of course, is the agricultural minister. The other one owns or manages the port in Archangels now. So, and he's working with the Chinese. So it's, some of these kids of the Siloviki are potential successors too. Sorry. I
So
just
you had a
wanted to-
question, sir?
Yeah, it's fairly, it's kind of pretty sensitive, but it's probably not even worth thinking about, but there are still signals coming from friends of Lukashenko. Saying, boy, it would be nice, wouldn't it? If we could have a little bit more back and forth with the West. Speaking for someone fairly powerful. If that were true, let's just assume it's malarkey. But if that were true, what would you think is the value of that? You've got a certain number of troops, I don't know how many, and a certain amount of equipment, Russian equipment, and people, Russian, loyal to Russia, I assume, in Belarus. And you've got about 50,000 or 60,000 Belarusian military. What could Lukashenko do that we would like?
Yes, it is certainly a hypothetical.
Yeah, it's completely
question.
hypothetical, but
And there are
it
many,
is the signals.
many new elements to that, including the nuclear factor, which Pavel mentioned, which isn't as yet there. But it's hard to imagine Lukashenko coming back now to playing that game.
I agree, yeah.
It is his favorite game. It is something we excelled at. He loved playing that for decades. But I think the personal space for maneuver has narrowed so much. It's somebody else. I think he is too much in that dependency upon Putin. And I think he lost that ability to.
Well, he's also Putin's really only ally. I mean, that's, you really can't say it's Kazakhstan or Armenia.
No.
I mean,
We've been hearing this for a year and a half, the same sort of, wish we could talk. We've always just dismissed it because
well, there's
I
a
don't
reason
see,
why.
what he could do. And I don't trust him either.
Well, there's a reason why Zelensky doesn't meet with the Belarusian opposition.
Tikhanovsky.
He's never met with her, and she's asked for it repeatedly to meet with Zelensky. So one has to ask the question of why. So why in all this, and there's, several 100,000 Belarusians in Poland, and there's two military units fighting in Ukrainian armed forces that are Belarusian. But there's like 4 or 5 Chechen battalions. So the question is, so there's something in the relationship. Greg, you had a question in the back.
Yeah, so I apologize, I was late, I was on another business call. So I'm just reacting to your first bullet in your summary about their inability, well, it's not up there now. And the inability to reconstitute and maintain their technological things like that. But I'm kind of like, so what? It comes down to an army that cares about its people, but it has a limited number and it's running out of ammunition, and we can't help it. We don't have enough. We can't even find gunpowder to refill the shells that the Ukrainians are trying to get. Then you got the Russian side, for which the bodies don't mean anything. They're just bodies that throw the problem. And they do have an unlimited amount of 152mm shells as an artillery army. So it's great that they're going to have a counteroffensive and they're going to push in. But Russia just has to keep pounding away, pounding away, pounding away. They have an unlimited supply of bodies. So why do we really think this? I think it's still on their side in a very almost World War I level type of battle.
So what's the question?
So, well, the question is, that's kind of how I think I think we're missing the point. They're just going to outlast. And at some point, Ukraine is going to run out of bodies, they're going to run out of shells, and we can run out of ability to supply them because our industrial system isn't able to do it, as you've seen many, many times. So is that a crazy conclusion, or are we just having wishful thinking that Ukraine's going to win?
Well,
Maybe they'll go fast and they'll run, but if Russia just stands the course, they just keep pounding away with their artillery, how can we actually prevail in the long run?
Certainly with Russian artillery, it's also a big issue. Whether you do have enough shells, whether you do have enough barrels, artillery is wearing out. And I think one of the very clear consequences of reforms Russian military forces underwent after the war with Georgia in the year 2008 and 9, Serdyukov's reforms, was a complete elimination of capability for long protracted conventional war. That was the idea, Serdyukov's idea. Let's get rid of all this infrastructure. Let's get rid of all these things. We need to invest in them, or we need to eliminate this mobilization capacity. We cannot invest. Let's eliminate. It was eliminated. So there is no unlimited capacity, much the same way as there is no unlimited number of bodies.
Well, let me ask you, related to your question, before this event today, we were talking about why are the Russians throwing in the airborne units into Bakhmut? You know, so far you've been Wagner, but then you suddenly start seeing the best, you know, the elite of the Russian army, the airborne forces being thrown into the meat grinder in Bakhmut, and now they're being depleted. So why would you throw in the groups that are designed for regime protection, right? And they're also designed as the elite of the Russian military. So you're throwing their best in. So, and you were saying in the discussion, Pavel, that this just doesn't make sense to you.
No, I think that what we know about Russian airborne troops doesn't really fit with what happened with these forces during this war. Yes, we know they were involved not only in Bakhmut, but before that in the very pitched battles trying to defend Kherson. They were there in the trenches, which is not their job at all, not just the job description of airborne forces. So I think they went through several rounds of.
But then they were withdrawn in
Yes,
an orderly withdrawal from
were
Kherson.
remarkably orderly. I think it's one of the best Russian operations in the whole war. Withdrawal from Kherson. I don't think there is any planning for repeating such an orderly withdrawal, but nevertheless, that was quite a success. But in the course of the battles there, in the course of withdrawal, again, these elite units were quite considerably degraded. And I think their rehabilitation and rebuilding made them into something very different, much the same way as the Marine brigades we saw briefly devastated near Ugledar didn't look like a Marine brigade at all, with their equipment, with their kind of
Again, they're depleted. So these elite units are depleted.
not just depleted, depleted kind of once, twice, but how they are kind of rehabilitated and rebuilt made them very different from the original design, from what they are.
You're saying they got torn completely down apart and then rebuilt.
And they rebuilt like
Into
a
something
conventional infantry unit, mechanized infantry brigade, but still with a bit of a kind of greater fighting spirit, probably because of their tradition than your unit built on from the mobilized quasi soldiers, so to say. But when you were saying about the kind of this tank battle, 14 against 14, that's certainly very much reflective of the fact that the most popular computer game in both Russia and Ukraine, hugely popular, is the World of Tanks, and that's how you fight it. So the number of users, mostly men, in Russia and Ukraine is in millions. So that's something most of men would kind of associate with, understand, grasp how it goes. Again, these battles in the World of Tanks, I am not a player. Without any air support, without any complications, again, very much tank against tank. And if that's the outcome,
Phil.
that really.
2 points. All the assault forces, whether they're airborne, air mobile, or naval infantry, became the tank riders since 2014. Because in the reforms, the Russians kept the professionals. Those are the tank drivers and the artillery guys, and they got rid of the infantry. And contrary to people's belief, infantry, good infantry, are not just bullet catchers. They are essential on the battlefield. They are the maneuverers around the mobile pillboxes. And so because they didn't have genuine infantry any longer. They use these assault forces as infantry, both the Ukrainians and the Russians from 2014 on. And when the Russians launched this military operation planned by intelligence officers rather than the general staff, they squandered that elite assault force. And so there wasn't any way to train the next generation. And yes, you can fill them, you can run them through training programs, but they're not hardened because they haven't any experience. And the only way to get them some experience is to put them in limited situations. That may be why we saw them in Bakhmut for a while, rotating them through, getting them shot at. You know, training is one thing. Getting shot at when you're doing that is an entirely different experience. And so the big vulnerability on the Russian side is a lack of competent infantry. Yes, you can use these assault forces if they're assaulting something, but if they're fighting a defensive battle and they haven't trained as infantrymen in exploiting armor on your side, then they're not going to be very good at it. And Ukrainians have really developed some practical experience doing that. And it's what we're good at. Tactical scale warfare is what we are good at. And we've shared that with Ukrainians. So, you know, on that issue, it's something different. But now that's my first point. My second point, I want to go back to what Greg said. Because I'm a sympathetic to Greg's view that Putin has decided that what he needs is to prolong this war until the West quits funding. Now, maybe the United States will quit funding it in June, okay? Because he is on non-kinetic parts or the elements of new generation warfare, he is cracking the West apart. And when you look at the political dynamics, not just in the United States, which is bad enough, but Germany now, he's really becoming effective in Germany. He's probably got 25% of Germans supporting his position. And if there were an election, he might get his candidate named premier or whatever they go, chancellor. So he and this fortification idea, and you pour lots of troops in there, and yes, they're going to die in great numbers. But if you can attrit Ukrainian forces, if you can prevent them from taking Crimea, if you can even hold the Russian border, what you can do is undermine the credibility of the the Ukrainian government in terms of it can win this war. And, you know, we look at all the Zapad exercises. They always have a war termination phase. I don't see the Russians talking about war termination here. No preparation. So their whole idea is to attrit our military and political and financial forces to the point where he will be able to restore his forces over time sufficiently to move back into Ukraine. Now, I'm not arguing that all this is going to be a success. I just see all the evidence that that is what his strategy is. And if we're not thinking about it, and that's where I agree with Greg, we got to start talking about these things. We want war termination. The Russians have no intention of even thinking about war termination. So you defeat an enemy by defeating his strategy, not by killing his troops on the ground. And so we're missing the big picture here in Washington, in Berlin, in my view.
Pavel, you want to respond?
Yeah, thank you, Greg, for your, if I may, for your comment and question. Yes, I agree with you that we should not underestimate the Russian military capacity, even in this statement, because it took 4 years to defeat ISIS in Iraq and Syria, and ISIS at the highest level of its military capacity had up to 1,000 troops, soldiers on just on the trucks, without significant amounts of main battle tanks, without significant amounts of artillery, and without combat aviation at all. So this war can go longer, much longer than we expect. And the Russia's armed forces, they're going to become what I called in autumn during the discussion with Glenn, to irregular forces, from regular armed forces to irregular ones. Especially right now, when the Ministry of Defense is trying to create volunteer formations within the Russian armed forces.
You mean like Patriot or
no, volunteer formations?
Like
no, it is not mercenaries. It's a kind, kind of battalions, or maybe companies, or maybe regiments, because there is no clear structure, organizational structure.
And why are they doing this?
To restore or partly restore manpower. They delegate officers from regular military units to command these volunteer formations according to the decree of the Ministry of Defense. It's not my hypothesis, it's official document. But at the end, when we deal with irregular forces, or with what looks like irregular forces, when we deal with the army, with a country which has a significant troubles with artillery, with barrels, with amount of artillery rounds, and so on, we should think about how again how to defeat these armed forces and how to defeat them as soon as possible, and how to defeat the strategy, of course, because we shouldn't forget one fact, that Russia is still a nuclear power, and if Russia will degrade further, there will be significant troubles with its nuclear arsenal. How to control this? However, several days ago, I had an interesting in-person discussion in Fletcher School when we discussed whether or not it is possible to occupy Russia in case of some troubles, especially with its military arsenal. And there are a lot of skeptics among the expert community in the United States that is just impossible. We should find a solution that will allow the Kremlin to keep its face, probably, or something like that. We shouldn't also overestimate the trouble. I mean, if Russia will not be defeated soon, Russia will try to get, revenge or revanche, and so on. And in this way, the West must occupy Russia, but not all Russia. Just several points where nuclear storage facilities located, and there is interesting geographical point. It's a highway from the Kazakh border in Chelyabinsk region, Troitsk, the city of Troitsk, town of Troitsk, strictly to the north to Nizhny Tagil. It's 500 kilometers. And across this highway, there are all the nuclear weapon manufacturing facilities. in Chelyabinsk and in Sverdlovsk region. And I presume it is not a rocket science to control this highway with using Kazakh territory. But why I say this? Because if we underestimate Russia, it's a problem. But if we overestimate the Russian capacity, it's also the problem, because people are trying to find, you know, a compromise solution. Maybe Ukraine will give up some territories. Maybe Ukraine will agree with occupation of Crimea, and so on and so on and so on. We shouldn't think like this. We should think how to defeat Russia as soon as possible. And my presentation was aimed to demonstrate that the objective Russian industrial capacity is not so huge, that Russia is not a superpower anymore, that Russia can be defeated. And that is my point.
Okay.
On the nuclear thing, though, I think that earlier we talked about air-delivered nuclear weapons. And I think it's certainly possible, but it's more likely that if they release the use of nuclear weapons, there will be artillery delivered. And they will be what we would call mini nukes, probably sub 0.2 of a kiloton weapon, because essentially that becomes a substitute for the lack of artillery tubes and munitions. It just becomes another means of artillery fire support.
We don't really know whether there are artillery shells in as a tactical nuclear weapons, because again, what is in the Russian nuclear storages? We are certain about air delivered, but whether they kept the artillery shells during this kind of massive reduction of the nuclear arsenal is not clear at all. And you know, in many ways, artillery shell means that your troops, your infantry, needs to be prepared for fighting on nuclear battles.
That was a new technology.
And that Soviet infantry was with all sort of equipment gear, with all even every tactical unit was trained to fight in this very ugly looking protective gear, which is completely gone. Artillery shell means that your troops are becoming
That was fourth generation warheads. It's completely different.
Okay, well, we need to wrap it up. We've gone over, then we extended, we could take it after the discussion. Certainly can continue it offline. So, but listen, I want to thank Pavel and Pavel for a very enlightening discussion today, and everyone who joined us. This will be posted on YouTube afterwards on our Jamestown channel. So look forward to meeting again in coming months to reevaluate what happened with the big offensive, or maybe it didn't happen. We don't know. So anyway, thank you, everyone. We'll see you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.